Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Mitch Michals from the Santa Monica Studios, the show that brings you different perspectives every Thursday in the tennis world. Got a reoccurring guest now, second time he's been on the show. It's been a year, and a lot's happened since our last chat when I think there was a golf course backdrop. Now we get the window and curtains set up. But legendary coach in the game, Brad Stine, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being back on again. Hopefully I'm back on because, like you said, we're in a little different spot than we were last year.
Yeah, we can just get into it. There's a lot to cover, and I do want to reference the piece that our colleague here at Tennis Channel, Joel Drucker, wrote. It's been, don't want to date yourself by the age, but you're approaching a year pilgrimage in the game. So there's been a lot of hard work to get to this point, a lot of different players. But the last time we talked, we were kind of discussing your current player, Tommy Paul's rise in the rankings. He'd won the event in Sweden. He was going into 2022 with a positive outlook. A lot's changed since then. We know about the Australian Open semifinal run, which we'll dive into. Some big wins, some competitive close matches, some even victories over the game's best. But I guess to start it off, in this past calendar year, was there any moment in particular where you felt like, okay, it's clicking, we've got something here, even if it wasn't that big result, something in practice, maybe a tight loss? What was the first sign that you saw that something special is really going on here?
I would point to probably two incidences. One, not necessarily the most positive thing, but sometimes those are they translate into better results. Last summer, Tommy and I had a sit down in 's-Hertogenbosch, the grass court event in Holland. He had played in Geneva before Paris, and then 's-Hertogenbosch, and had 3 first-round losses in a row. And to be honest, like he was a little bit, he was struggling a little bit mentally, emotionally, and I just felt that he hadn't competed very well in the matches, and particularly Geneva and this event at 's-Hertogenbosch. And so we had a little sit down, and I kind of laid into him a little bit, to be honest. And to his credit, I think that I once heard legendary NBA coach Don Nelson speak, and he said that with every player-coach relationship, there comes a point where the coach pushes, and how the player responds to that determines in a large way the direction of their relationship and how that goes forward. And to Tommy's credit, when I pushed him at that time, he responded extremely well, and actually took everything, all the criticism and everything that I was laying on him at the time, extremely well. And I think from there, that's when the rest of that grass court season at that time, and the hard court season after that, and even the fall, I think it established for the rest of that year, last year, what direction we were going. And we made some really good progress through that. Tommy had a very good grass court season. He played well on the hard courts, and then, third round at the US Open last year. And so I think that moment really set the tone. So for me, that was number one. Yeah. And the second was this year in Adelaide. Adelaide was a really big thing because Tommy lost to Jack Draper. And after the match, he sent me a long text, and kind of a frustrated, irritating text on his part, saying that, he had been up a break in the first set and ended up losing that set, and said that, he was just really tired of feeling that he was, in control of matches and then letting them get away. And that had happened a few times here and there. So he actually made a list of things that he felt he needed to do better. And it was a lot of things that myself and his strength and conditioning coach, Franco, and Hugo Armando, who helps Tommy when I'm not in Florida, we had all been pushing Tommy towards, but it had a lot to do with concentration, focus, intensity in practice, and those kind of things. And it really opened the door. Tommy really created a scenario where me and the rest of the team were all able to kind of use his words against him to keep pushing him and pushing him harder. He recognized that the next really big step in his progression as a player was going to be more mental than it was going to be physical or technical or tactical necessarily. And so going into Australian Open, we had like 4 or 5 days, I can't remember exactly, of really, really, really highly focused and intense practices. And probably the best practices, the most consistent intensity level that I had really seen from Tommy. And I think that was really a big translator to how he performed in the event there as well.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers speak to themselves. I love that accountability story. And then every time that he would push back, you could say, well, you did say this. You did say you wanted
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, 40 wins in the last calendar year. We know the major semi. He's into the top 20 now. And not just because of who he became, but that match in Canada against Alcaraz really put him on a different platform in terms of who he beat, how he beat one of the best pure athletes the game's seen in a long time, and Carlos Alcaraz. But also, what I noticed from that match, Brad, was that he served very big in key moments. There was a couple match point down, break point downs, having to protect his own serve, where he got first serves in. He was very consistent. And I know one of the things you preached about with him in reference in articles is coming forward and attacking. Has that started to click as well in this last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was we were on that progression. I mean, when he won Stockholm and going back to the fall U.S. Open, not U.S. Open, but the fall Indian Wells, the Indian Wells event that was held in October. I don't know what that was, at 2021.
2021, yeah.
It seems like so long ago now, but if you go back to those events, that's where we really, really started kicking in with a lot of transition and coming forward. He beat Rublev at Indian Wells that year, and I think he came in like 45 times or something like that. I know that when he beat Andy Murray at Stockholm, that he came in like in the 40s again, was really, really attacking and seeing the advantages of doing that. And that's something that we've just continued to progress with and have kept as a cornerstone of his game. Tommy's identity has really translated from being kind of, when I started with him way back in 2019, to being kind of a counterpuncher, to now being what we want him to be, which is a really, really effective all court player that can make adjustments. He can come forward more if it's needed against a particular player, even if maybe you're not playing well, for some period of time in a match, and you feel like, your forehand's off or your backhand's off. So, you can make an adjustment and start attacking more and do some different things. So I would say that, hopefully he's described at this point as being an all court player with more of an aggressive mindset, an attacking mindset.
Yeah, I certainly think that's a fair comparison and fair description, given where he's come and what he's done so far. I want to get to the run in a second, but I referenced the piece by Joel Drucker that highlights your coaching and your career.
Yeah, and then you picked on my age, man.
A little bit.
Who's older, me or Joel?
That's true. We won't get into that debate.
I don't know, actually. I don't know the answer to that, but I know Joel's pretty old.
I wanted to hear your reaction to former coach, former pupil, Jim Courier's comment where he said, Brad's all protein, no fat. Is that a fair comparison? Is that a fair line?
It's funny. Jim's obviously, I mean, in my mind, Jim's kind of the premier commentator in tennis nowadays, and a basic function of that is how witty and sharp he is. He's a little bit dry all the time, but those kind of comments, that's a classic Jim. And to be honest with you, I mean, I love that quote. I would take that quote any day of the week. So it was one that stuck out in my mind when I read the article.
Well, your style, and you admitted the fact that you like to be confrontational without being adversarial, which I think, to put it mildly, you want to have those tough discussions with your players. You don't want to run from them without getting into a fight every single time. Where did that development come from for you? And I guess the follow-up to that would be, do you think that might be missing with the current crop of young athletes? Are there enough confrontations with these players as they develop?
Yeah, I think it's, if I go back to the early portion of my coaching and when I first got into coaching, one of my mentors, I always look back and I feel like I had 4 really strong mentors through the course of my coaching career. And one of those guys was Greg Patton, who was an absolute legend, still is a legend, in collegiate tennis, was 2-time NCAA Coach of the Year. And I started coaching and got involved with coaching really because of Greg in a lot of ways, and was involved with that. I think we talked last time we were on about the Junior Davis Cup program. And one of the things that Greg said is that coaching is 80% confrontation. And I've taken that over the years, and I've mellowed in my old age now a little bit. When I was younger and I was first coaching college tennis, I was, in my 20s, and I was pretty aggressively confrontational. There were a lot of aggressive confrontation. It was also when you're a collegiate coach, it's a little bit of a different environment. When you have a group of guys, you can be a little bit more confrontational in front of a group. But over the years in dealing with, at the pro level, and now having coached on the pro level for over 30 years, when you're with an individual guy, there's still constant confrontation. But as you said, it doesn't have to be confrontational, it doesn't have to be adversarial. But if you're not confronting your players on what they're doing and how they're doing it, why they're doing it, when they're doing it, all those kind of things. I mean, to me, those are confrontations, even though it might be as simple as just asking a question, why'd you play that shot to that position, or, at that score in the match, you've got to make a stronger presentation with your body language and those kind of things. But confronting those things as they come up are extremely important. I mean, that's part of coaching. That's what you have to be doing to try and help your player become a better player. So confrontation is a key element for sure.
Right. And just to kind of borrow another thing in the team sports side of it, it's like those closed locker room meetings where players and teammates who are, on the same page, they might have to just have those confrontations to be like, why did this happen? Why did you do this? Clear the air. It's better to not let things be unsaid. And I think that's always been a key, moment, is having the player, to your credit and to the player's credit for sure, Brad, you have to be receptive to this. And I think that's how we know if partnerships work. It's obvious from the outside that Tommy Paul has been receptive. I know you don't have to name any names, but I'm sure in the past there's been players that haven't been receptive and probably didn't really work out for the partnership wise.
Yeah, no, every player that you work with, like you said, at this point in my coaching career and how long I've been on tour, I've worked with quite a few different guys. And so everybody's personality is a little bit different. And you learn how you can be a little bit confrontational, and get the most out of your player, hopefully. And you're not wrong. Sometimes the confrontations become more confrontational. It's also different when you're working with, I've coached guys that were teenagers, and I've coached guys that were in their late 20s and married and had kids. And so, those life situations that players are in, their level of maturity is different. I think how you're going to deal with an 18 or 19 or 20-year-old who's relatively new and fresh on tour, and the standards that you're trying to hold them to and trying to make them be more professional is going to be different than working with a guy who's 26 or 27 or 28. If we take that back to my current situation with Tommy, Tommy had a reputation when we started of not being particularly professional. He was having a good time and having fun out there on the tour, and really enjoying all the fun aspects that tour life can kind of offer you. But he probably wasn't as disciplined and professional as he needed to be. And so that was something that, we slowly but surely progressed towards. And I would say that Tommy's one of the most professional guys on tour at this point.
I would agree with that. And I would just kind of close on the coaching side of things with the fact that you've been in the game for obviously so long, not to again beat that drum, but do you still see yourself with all the equity you built up as that young coach that had to prove himself, that didn't come from the high level background? Because I think that was, your MO for so long was that, hey, I didn't have the high level tennis background. I have to prove it every single day. Even at your age now and your status in the game, do you still approach it that way?
Yeah, I think it's in my DNA a little bit. I've always had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, and I think that high performing people that are successful in whatever field, they tend to question themselves. They're never quite satisfied. They always think they can do a little bit better. Failure is obviously part of working again at any high level production that you're doing, whether it's coaching or whether you're in business or whatever it is. So you're always going to have some failures, whether that's in an individual loss or whatever it is. And I have a tendency to look at myself a lot of the time. What the player's done on the court, you recognize what they could have done to perform better. But I tend to question myself as to, did I make sure that I was clear about how he was supposed to play or what he was supposed to do. And so I have a tendency to look inward. So I think that doubt in a way has always been something that's been a positive thing for me to help myself try and progress. And I like to think, and I still feel very, very much like this, that I'm a lifelong learner, both on and off the tennis court. I'm a curious type of person. I like going places and learning about things and finding out stuff. And so I think that I'm also open, with the tendencies that are happening in the game. You see a guy like Alcaraz or Sinner and these guys coming along and how they're producing their games now, and trying to figure out, ways that we can be successful against those guys, instead of always looking. Now we're, obviously the generations are changing with Roger gone, and Rafa's, kind of in a little bit of a limbo question mark as to where he's going to be and everything. And so you're confronted all the time with new challenges and new situations. And I think that's a great thing. It's a great thing for me, and it's good for Tommy. And Tommy, although he doesn't maybe like's not the right word. He doesn't make this presentation a lot publicly, but Tommy's a pretty analytical guy when it comes to the game. And I think he has a very, very high tennis IQ. He loves looking at film and video of tennis. And he has this tendency, he'll tell you this himself, but when he's in a tournament, he'll watch the matches all the time. So he'll come back to the hotel and he'll be watching matches that are going on at the tournament. When he loses, he has a tendency to kind of disengage from that a little bit and kind of get away from it, which I think is actually a really healthy process for him, that he does stay engaged when he's still actively in the tournaments. And then as soon as he loses, he kind of like steps away from it a little bit and gets himself to, Tommy likes to get out on the water when he's at home, and he likes to do a little bit of fishing and wake surfing and stuff like that. And, so I think it's a healthy balance for him to kind of create those two kind of things.
More with Brad Stine here on Tennis Channel Inside In. You referenced Tommy Paul's growth and working with him. The Australian Open, and you referenced those great practices, the high intensity, how crisp he was looking. I know players don't look at the draw, but did you get a sense early on, like, Tommy's playing well, stuff's starting to happen, this is a real opportunity here? Like, were you at least keeping an eye on the options that it could be a profitable and an opportunity for Tommy in Australia?
Well, we obviously saw right away, when Brooksby beat Rude, who Tommy had lost to at the U.S. Open. I mean, that opened the draw up a little bit. He didn't have an easy second round, playing Davidovich Fokina, and that was a serious battle, 5-setter. But I think that experience is the best teacher, right? And Tommy has now been in some situations where he's made some third rounds at slams, and he's competed in and gotten through some 5-setters. And so he's much more acclimated to dealing with the physical and the mental rigors of winning a match like that, having your day off, and then coming back and knowing you have to produce really, really good tennis again against whoever it is that you're playing. The draw certainly opened up a little bit for him. I wouldn't say that he had a super, super easy draw. He beat Davidovich Fokina and he beat Bautista Agut in that run, who I both consider to be, exceptionally good players and not easy guys to get by any means. But he didn't have to play anybody in the top 10 or the top 15. Bautista Agut's been there obviously before, but he dropped off a little bit. Tommy had also beaten him in Paris, in the fall. And so that gave him a little bit more confidence and self-belief, because I don't know if you know that, but previous to Tommy beating him in Paris, he was 0-3 against him. Yeah. And the 3 matches that he lost the exact same score every time, 4-2, 4-2, 4-2. And they were on 3 different surfaces. So it was kind of like Bautista Agut was a little bit of a thorn in his side. So beating him in Paris, I think definitely was a big thing going into when he played him in the Australian Open.
That was a good match to reference because it was very clean. That was one where we looked at it and we thought, oh, Bautista Agut's been there. It's tricky. He knows how to win these matches. And Tommy played as efficient as we've seen. So he obviously beat Ben Shelton in the quarterfinal, the All-American clash. It was a phenomenal moment. Had his mom there. It was great. Now that he won, were you guys able to laugh at the fact that Ben Shelton heard you kind of coaching?
What's funny is that obviously everybody references that, and me with the tea and everything. It was funny when Tommy asked me. Tommy came over to the corner and he asked me, and there's kind of a glass barrier where we were sitting, and I couldn't hear him. And so he asked again, and that's when I said the tea. If I had responded right away the first time, I don't think Ben would have seen it or heard it. But Ben said after the match that he never saw me. Okay. He told me and Tommy in the cool down area afterwards that he didn't actually see the big screen or me do the sign, but that he was 100% convinced in his mind that I was going to tell Tommy to sit on the tee. Okay. Because he had beaten him there. He had beaten him there twice in that game. That was a long game with a bunch of deuce ads. Yeah. And he had beaten him twice down the tee already. And so Ben said, I knew you were going to tell him to sit on the tee. That's what he said to me. But it turned out obviously to be a bit of a comical moment. I didn't mean by any means to put myself in the spotlight and take away from that situation with Tommy. But it was probably not my smartest coaching moment.
It all did work out. He gets the break and he wins the match. It was phenomenal stuff. Loses to the eventual champ, Novak Djokovic. Obviously, no shame there. I thought he handled the press conference really smart in terms of, look, this is what I was trying to do. I had a game plan. This guy just didn't let me do it. Was their perspective gained pretty quickly? I know it's a tough loss losing at that level, but you lose to the best in the game and you get to a major semifinal. It seems like you guys were able to achieve some perspective pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes the kind of match that he played against Novak, and the score, and given that you're playing Novak and in that environment, where he's absolutely owned that court, it doesn't sting almost as much as if you had a break in the fifth set or something like that and ended up losing. The matches that are super close where you feel like, man, I was in it, I had a chance to win. If I could have executed on a shot or two here and there, I think sting more than the ones where you kind of get your butt kicked, and you come away from that match and you were like, man, I mean, Novak was just way too good in the match. I think there was a little bit of a combination of, Novak playing phenomenally good tennis, being so comfortable in that environment, Tommy being in his first ever semifinal of a Grand Slam and having to play a guy who's absolutely owned that court. And Tommy didn't necessarily produce his best tennis, but as you referenced, and as he said in the press conference, he didn't let me play my best tennis. It was hard to find a way to play my best tennis when he was playing so well. And, that one of the interesting things for me for that match was that in Australia this year on the center court, in the coaching boxes, they provided us with iPads that had all these different statistical information on it. And you could click on service information and return information and all this different stuff. And the stats for Novak returning in the match were absolutely ridiculous. Like it was a joke. The guy barely missed a return throughout the entirety of the match. And that was one of the biggest things. He just was relentless in putting pressure on Tommy, and especially on second serves. He not only wasn't missing any returns, but he was actually, jumping on second serve returns and putting Tommy on the defense immediately within the points. And it was, if you were a Tommy Paul fan, it was tough. If you were a Novak Djokovic fan watching that match, I mean, you were just like, this is clinical, how exceptionally good he was playing the match.
It just doesn't give you anything. It's crazy. Like at this stage too in his career, how consistent and how much he rises up in big moments. But that was a heck of a run. We know these moments happen. I did want to ask you about a month later, because I do think that one of the trickier things about having success is building off of it and not just having the letdown that comes with it. Uh, Tommy was in one of the craziest matches I've ever seen against Taylor Fritz in Acapulco. At what point did you realize that was just utter chaos? There's cramping, throwing.
Yeah, that was one of the craziest matches I've watched. And like we said, I've been around the game for over 30 years. But I mean, it was a wild scenario, the entire situation. The crowds down there in Acapulco, the Mexican fans I mean, they're crazy tennis fans, and they were absolutely going nuts. The environment in the stadium, it was kind of like it should have been a scene in a World War I movie. It was just it became trench warfare, a battle of attrition. Both guys cramping, and then I mean the ultimate turning point. You don't say this very often in a match. The ultimate turning point was when Fritz went to the sideline and threw up, and from that point on, Tommy kind of dominated. It was kind of funny because you think sometimes, when you throw up like that, you kind of relieve a little bit of what's going on. But Taylor just dropped off. I mean, you could see that he was starting. I mentioned it to the people that we were sitting with, and I said, man, Taylor's starting to struggle a little bit now. You had seen Tommy struggling for a little bit, but I was like, hey, I think Taylor's starting to struggle. And then all of a sudden it just hit him, and he was, it was obvious that he was struggling. And then, like I said, the key moment in the match was like the guy throws up. It wasn't a forehand down the line or a passing shot or, on a big point. It was like the guy has to run to the sideline and throw up. And I actually saw it coming. I said to someone, I was like, I could see him as he was standing there about to serve. And I was like, he's going to throw up. He's going to throw up. And then he ran to the sideline, and from there on, he just, I don't know if he lost that much more energy or what it was, but Tommy maybe seeing that got a little bit of a boost also and pushed himself a little bit more, but he really kind of dominated from that point on and through the breaker and everything. But what a crazy match, what a crazy scenario. It's one of those ones where I think as the year goes by, people have to go back to that and revisit that as potentially one of the most interesting, craziest, intense matches that happened throughout the entirety of the year.
We had Andrea Petrovic calling that match, and she was just calling it a Greek tragedy. It was, but as a coach, you put your hat on. It's a tremendous victory. You show that guts to Tommy Paul to win that match. Do you temper expectations for the final, because he plays Demonauer and he put up a fight, but you could just see the energy level wasn't what he was used to, and it's understandable given the war that he had just been in.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I think that Tommy came out and did an unbelievable job in that match against Demonauer, because, he ends up playing such a clean, good first set. Tactically played exactly like we talked about in the match. I mean, executed extremely well, wins the first set. And, at that point, you're like, okay, we're forcing three no matter what. And unfortunately for our side, Alex stepped it up and started playing, a little bit better, a little bit stronger. And you could see Tommy was starting to fade a little bit towards the end of the second set. And then as the third set started, the match with Taylor kind of caught up with him, and he started feeling his body a little bit more, and was, it's hard because you're on the verge of potentially cramping again, and so you just have a tough time pushing yourself to the limit at that point. But I was super impressed, to be honest with you, at how well Tommy performed. And after the match, Alex's coach, who is a good friend of mine, someone that I know extremely well, played here at Fresno State, where I coached a number of years before him. But Peter Luxak, he came up and he told Tommy, he said, man, you were an absolute warrior out there. I never thought you were going to have that much left in the tank coming into that match. So that was nice of him to say. And I think Tommy got a little bit of a boost from that and, felt good about himself, even though he had lost the match.
Well, it was a tremendous performance, as I said, and he got the win over Fritz, which was a long time coming given the last couple matches before. And Brad, I got to say, I kind of like where American men's tennis is at right now, in the sense of, we know the camaraderie amongst the boys, and I'm not going to compare it to your previous era where it was just slam winner, Hall of Famer left and right, but there's this nice place of Fritz is the top ranked American guy. Tommy's on his heels. Tiafoe's out there. We have Shelton coming up. It's obviously I'd say cordial and friendly, but it seems very competitive. It seems like there's some jockeying for who can be the top dog and get one up on each other. That's how I'm seeing it from the outside. Inside, I'm sure it's as competitive as ever.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, listen, it's been well, spoken about and documented that American tennis has been on the rise, and I think that Taylor and Francis and Tommy and Riley Opelka, kind of led the charge of that a little bit. And then you throw in, we've been missing for a little bit now, Sebi Korda, who was having an amazing Australian Open as well. And then you've got, like you said, Ben obviously created a huge stir in Australia and has gotten a lot of notoriety for what he was able to do down there, and then has still been doing some damage on the tour, and we'll see if he can continue to push, and he's so young and so young, especially for being the tour and everything. And then I think Mackie McDonald has been doing a great job. He's been getting some really high level wins. Marcos Garron has been pushing through. So we've been getting these situations. I'm for sure leaving some guys out because you go down through the list. I mean, Maxime Cressy's won a tournament. He sometimes is a little bit forgotten about because he's kind of like quiet and on the fringe a little bit. He's not quite as connected with the rest of the American guys. But everybody else, man, they're so close and so tight with what they're doing. Where, you bring quarterback, Brooksby's been injured. Kudla's gotten into the top 100. Now you just got Nakashima that's in there, always super dangerous. I think the potential within that group, and then I look at Chris Eubanks, who just cracked the top 100. I think Alex Kovacevic is going to crack the top 100 here, pretty soon, and that guy I think is very, very dangerous. So it's. The great thing is just like we said before, just the numbers, having those numbers, but also having the guys that we have at the top who are starting to beat a lot of the top players. But you look at the draws, and especially the smaller tournaments, Dallas, Delray. I mean, we had 10, 12, 14 American guys in the draws. Yeah. So and they are definitely pushing and feeding off of each other. I think 99.9% of those guys that I see have a very healthy outlook about actually wanting to see their friends do well. We left one out that also did well in Australia, JJ Wolf. Oh yeah. JJ Wolf's been having a heck of a year so far. So I mean, I think that just all feeds off of itself, and hopefully it has a trickle down effect, to the next generation of guys that are looking at that whether it's juniors or guys that are coming out of college tennis that also are looking at all that production, and those guys also are all very, very open to spending time with the younger guys, and inviting them in for training and practices and those kind of things. So I think we're in a great position with where we're at. I think it's super exciting that Bob Bryan just got named Davis Cup captain. I think the guys have a really good feel for Bob. Bob's got a great presentation with the guys. Yeah. Obviously, extremely knowledgeable and been around the game forever. So, hopefully, American tennis on a nationwide basis and representing the country as within tennis can do extremely well also.
No, the optimism is fully warranted based on the results, and to kind of open it further to some other, I guess, the top of the game. We know that the cream rises, and we know the era of the big three winding down. Federer retired, Nadal out with an injury. Novak wasn't allowed to play the Sunshine Double, and yet there were still the same names kind of going deep into both of these tournaments. And I think, I'm not surprised by it necessarily, because I think the opportunity in the moment, it's, just a matter of fact, someone's going to seize it. But we did see, Brad, and we did see the same players, the Alcarazes, the Sinners, coming through, going on deep runs. And of course, Medvedev, who makes 5 straight finals, which is just absurd, but not shocking to see. Maybe the names might be surprising, but eventually the top players will emerge from a crop of really talented individuals.
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. And I do think I had this conversation not too long ago with Jose Higueras, about the fact that, Novak's the last of the big three, the youngest still. Rafa, like we said, is a little bit in limbo where he's going to go, but he's certainly been much more vulnerable over the last 6 or 8 months. He's I think he's lost to 5 Americans in a row or something like that. Maybe it was 4, I'm not sure, but there's a vulnerability there with him that wasn't there before. Novak still has that aura of invincibility, but I think everybody else that's in the draws as good as Medvedev is, as good as Alcaraz is, as good as Sinner is, anybody else that you can name in the top 10, I think that everybody, not just the American guys, feel that every single one of those guys is vulnerable on any given day. Whereas when you were competing with the big three previously, man, you felt like, okay, maybe I can play the match of my life and beat one of these guys, but then I have to play another one right behind it. And then I might have to play a third one behind that. And the chances of getting through two of them is crazy, much less three of them. Whereas I feel like now there's a sense of confidence, hope in the locker room a little bit more with the guys that are ranked outside the top 10, outside the top 20 or 30 even, where I think that this, I've said this for a while, I think this generation of tennis is the deepest that we've ever seen. You see the guys at the top of the game going, multiple set matches, 4 set matches or 5 set matches in slams, 3 set matches in Masters 1000s or the other tournaments on a much more regular basis, even when they're playing against guys that are ranked outside the top 50 maybe. And that's just because everybody's capable of producing top 10 level tennis for some period of time in a match nowadays. Yeah. Whereas I don't think that was true as much, going back to like Jim Courier's era. The guys outside the top 50 didn't really produce that kind of tennis. And so the top guys kind of dominated them a little bit more. But nowadays, I mean, what you see more and more and more competitive matches and more upsets. And I think that's kind of a good thing for tennis too.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd just add to that, because 100% it seems more competitive than it's ever been. I would also just add that the top players, it seems like what separates them is their ability to adjust, to read kind of the landscape of how this match is going, what's happening. Plan A is not there. What can plan B do? What is that opponent doing? I watched Medvedev do it a couple times in that Miami run. And even the young guys like Alcaraz and obviously Tommy as well. It seems like when you get to a certain point when the upset surge is coming, they can gather themselves, show that composure, the mental side of it, and kind of regroup and make the adjustments they need. Because the margins are so slim. That's a testament to how deep the game is.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I mean, it's also a testament to the toughness of the guys that do achieve the greatest heights of the game. I mean, you look at the big three, and now, like you mentioned, Medvedev's the guy that, for me, he was kind of establishing that kind of aura of invincibility, but then he fell off for a little while. Now he's back again, 5 finals in a row, and you're like, okay, can anybody beat the guy? Can anybody do anything? And I think Carlos and Sinner both are young enough now that they have a hiccup here and there. They're both just absolutely incredible ball strikers and tennis players in general, but there's still some times where you feel like, okay, he's gonna give something away, or he's gonna let you into the match a little bit here and there, and guys feel like there's a sense of hope. Maybe I feel like that because Tommy has beaten both of those guys, so hopefully he can produce those kind of matches and beat those guys again down the road, because obviously if Tommy or if Taylor or if Francis want to have a chance to win a slam, then they're going to have to beat those guys at some point in the draws. Yeah. And so I think that, whether it certainly hasn't been talked about, I don't think, but I like the idea that we get it's like you get these guys that have to play an American at, an earlier round, and one of those guys takes some energy out of him, and then they play another American, and that guy can take some energy out of him, and then hopefully the next guy can beat him. Yeah. And they're kind of, it's almost like a team effort producing an American Grand Slam winner, hopefully here, relatively soon. And I think once, we saw that in Jim's generation, once somebody breaks through and actually wins one. Yeah. We saw that last year with Taylor winning Indian Wells, how I think that really inspired the other guys a little bit. If we can get an American guy that can break through and win a slam, I think it'll have that same effect. Yeah. Again, on pushing everybody to the next level and getting them even better.
That's what's crazy, right? Like that era, like if you ask the casual, like who was the first one in that era, they'd probably all, like a lot of people would get that question wrong. They'd be like, oh, it had to be Sampras probably won it first, or it's like, no, Michael Chang winning that French Open.
Yeah.
One that opened the floodgates there. Brad, this has been a pleasure. Really appreciate you taking time to chat. We can kind of end with this, with the clay court season coming up. what do we have on the docket for goals? What are we trying to, in your camp with Tommy Paul, gearing up? I know he's playing in the Clay Court Championships in Houston. Going to be going over to Europe soon. What are the goals for the camp and how to keep steadily improving?
I think that it's funny because we just had a conversation, today. I'm not in Houston. Hugo Armando and Franco Herrero are there, and we've kind of looked at Houston. Don't tell the Houston people this. I'm semi-joking, obviously, but we wanted to have a really good training block leading into the clay court season. Tommy didn't have a particularly good training block. He didn't have much time last year to get ready for clay, and he didn't have a very good clay court season last year. And I think that Tommy's a guy that can play very well on the clay, and I think he can have very good results on the clay. And so we feel like he's got a lot of ground to make up right now, a potential, with results. Doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to win any of these big tournaments, but if he can just continue to kind of maintain the consistency in his level of play and get through to the deeper rounds of tournaments, he's going to be making points right now, which is going to help him in the rankings. And we want to keep progressing forward in the rankings and getting closer to cracking top 10. I mean, ultimately right now he's in the top 20. So obviously that's kind of the next barrier for us to try and look at, is to try and get him to the top 10. For me personally, I also am really, really, really big, and you don't want to push too much. You don't want to talk about it too much, but I really want to see him start winning more titles. He has one title on the docket right now, and he needs to win more titles. I think for us to really be honestly in the conversation about Tommy winning major titles, that he has to win more titles in general and make that become a more common factor in what happens within his game, whether it's 500s or 1000s or 250s. I don't care. We just need to win more titles. It becomes a habit. The old saying from Vince Lombardi, that winning becomes a habit. The end of that saying is, unfortunately, losing does too. That part always gets left out, So for me, that's a big thing. And I would love to see that happen this week in Houston. I would love to see it happen, on some of the other bigger events, and winning some titles in preparation for some of the Grand Slams that are coming up.
We can't wait to see what happens, and getting used to that winner's circle. That's the name of the game, right? And only one champion, but there's opportunities out there. He's played well. It's a testament to your coaching and everything that's gone on. Brad Stine, this has been a blast. Thanks again for coming on. You're welcome anytime. Been a long time coach in the game, was the youngest coach in college tennis. So you had both ends of the spectrum. So
that's a long time ago.
A long time ago. But Brad Stine, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining Tennis Channel Inside In.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it.